Hey guys, today for the first time ever in DFFOO we get a simultaneous release, or I should say simultaneous rework of a character across both JP and global version of the game. And so of course the question is really, how good is Papalymo? In this video I'll be covering a little bit more in depth about his kit, as well as my thoughts and opinion about where he stands in the current meta. Few quick disclaimers though before we start. First off, this is an update to my pool plan video. I'll also put a link to that video in the video description as well in case you are interested. Secondly, a lot of the information here is derived from the Tonberry Troupe's detailed infographic on Papalymo, and really as far as character kits go, there's nothing as in-depth as the Tonberry Troupe graphics. I will also put a link to their graphics as well, so if you want more information across Papalymo's kit, do check them out as well. Finally, as with any and all character evaluations, this is really a matter of opinion. I'll try my best to really just try to focus on what he can do, and I'll try to be as fair and balanced as possible. But really, as always, the decision whether to pull or skip any character, no matter how good they are, is an individual decision to make. And it's always based on many different factors, such as the level of resource that you have, who you already have built up in your roster, how you would like to approach the game and complete endgame stages, as well as of course whether or not you like the character to begin with. As such, I won't really be recommending whether to pull or skip Papalymo. I will of course be sharing my own personal plans, but usually my recommendation for this kind of thing is to also do your own research as well, so that you can make the best informed decision whether or not Papalymo will give you a good return of investment. So firstly, starting off with an overview on Papalymo's kit. Papalymo is a turn hogger DPS. With his rework and the release of his BT though, he now also carries very strong party utility, and I'll cover more in that on the next slide. Papalymo's kit covers two different stances, either the fire stance or the ice stance, and which stance he's in depends on which skills he uses. His S1 Astral Fire puts him in fire stance, and his S2 Umbral Ice will put him in the ice stance. You cannot be in both stances at once. Entering one stance will cancel out the effects of the other. Depending on the stance that he's in, his attacks cover both AoE or single target. For example, his Astral Fire is an AoE 6 HP dumps attack, whereas his Umbral Ice is single target but is 12 HP dumps total. Likewise, he does also have access to two special modified Brave and HP attacks called Xenoglossy and Foul. Xenoglossy is 10 dumps but single target, whereas Foul is 6 dumps but AoE. Papalymo is considered a turn hogger because he has the free and instant turn ability across a lot of his kit. His EX, LD, his modified attack, Xenoglossy and Foul, as well as his FR are all instant turn and free turns as well. None of them will increase the turn count. As we can imagine, this means that Papalymo can potentially chain many attacks in sequence, all the while without increasing the turn count and doing some decent damage overall. Upon use of Papalymo's EX and LD, he gets a special overhead stack called Polyglot. You can only have maximum of 2 polyglots at once, but Polyglot is the buff, I should say, or the effect that gives him access to both his Xenoglossy and Foul. And upon use of either Xenoglossy or Foul, his Polyglot will be reduced by 1. Finally, using Foul also gives Papalymo a free ability use on the next turn, which means that he can then use either his Astral Fire S1 or his Umbral Ice S2 for more damage, as well as potentially changing stances. To me, the highlight of Papalymo's release is Papalymo's BT. And yes, overall this means that if you really want to use Papalymo effectively, his BT weapon is a must pull and a must max out. If you really don't want to chase for Papalymo's BT, or if like me you are also running low on ingots and want to skip, then my recommendation is to actually just skip Papalymo altogether. Papalymo without the BT means that you lose virtually all his utility, which means then you are more or less left with really only the damage portion of his kit. In which case, in my mind, why go for Papalymo? Might as well just go for any other DPS characters anyway. So what's so good about Papalymo's BT? I won't cover every single thing that BT does. His BT will provide you the standard BT auras, but so does every other BT in the game. If you are keen on what the standard auras are, you can always check out the Tonberry Troupe, where they go in complete detail every single thing that BT does. But there are two components of the BT that to me really stands out and may potentially be enticing enough to warrant a pull depending on what you like. First off, when using his BT finisher, so either his BT plus or the BT finisher at the end of his BT mode, Papalymo will land a 6-turn gold frame debuff called the Far Edge of Fate. This debuff is in some ways similar to Celsius because it does also inflict the paralysis or unable to act for the 6-turn duration. Alongside this gold frame debuff also lowers the enemy's HP damage resistance by 20%. And while the duration is shorter than Celsius, the one notable thing about this debuff is that it inflicts an additional 10% HP damage whenever the enemy receives any HP attacks. This is in effect very similar to Wise's BT if you've pulled for him. So essentially, for example, if your attacks do 1 million damage to the enemy and they have this debuff up, it will then do 1.1 million HP damage overall. This is an important component to his damage, and the good thing is that because this is tied to a debuff, this also means that the rest of the party also benefits from these effects as well. The other thing that I really want to highlight is that Papalymo's BT does have additional party-wide effects, but this is dependent on which stance that he is in. While Papalymo is in the fire stance, all party attacks will ignore defense, so this is essentially the same as Locke's BT effect. All party members will double the number of brave hits that they do. So for example, if your attack normally does 4 brave attacks before the HP dump, it will now do 8. And the entire party will get standard fire enchant as well. While Papalymo is in the ice stance, the entire party will gain brave anytime you do a brave attack. This is in effect similar to Kitsu's LD call or Charlotta's BT effect if you've used either of those before. Also, the entire party will gain brave after every field turn, which is after any player or enemy turn. The amount of brave gain is dependent on your attack stat. And finally, the entire party will get ice enchant. While you can only be in one stance at a time, so for example, you cannot get both fire and ice enchant, the effects across both stances are extremely powerful. So for example, in the fire stance, essentially you are getting Locke's BT effect plus Precious LD effect plus fire enchant. Whereas in your ice stance, you are sort of getting like a Kate Sif effect and maybe something like a Garnet's BT effect and ice enchant all at once. As you can see also, the fire stance specialize in doing brave damage, whereas the ice stance specialize more in gaining brave. This is also true for Papalymo's standard fire and ice attacks. This means that you can potentially tailor, so for example, if you're in a fight that requires a lot of brave shaving, then usually the fire stance is the way to go. Whereas if the fight has huge brave damage resistances or penalties, then you can go into ice stance where you can virtually ignore all of it and still deal very good damage even if you're doing 1 brave damage. So like I said, I won't really say whether or not Papalymo is a must pull or not. I will maybe cover more in detail about his pros and cons, and like I said, I will cover my plans. But one thing I do want to mention though is that it also depends a bit on your expectations. There is a lot of hype surrounding this event because essentially we are getting Papalymo 4 months early, and anytime we in the past I should say, anytime we get a time travel character, usually they are far beyond the current meta. I can't really say that it's the same for Papalymo. Damage wise, I don't think he will far and away out damage the rest of the meta. Don't get me wrong, he doesn't do terrible damage. I think overall he does solid damage, and if I were to put some sort of grading on the damage that he does, he's probably sitting somewhere around the A tier. But if you're coming in and pulling for Papalymo based on the hype surrounding him and hoping that since he's coming 4 months early in GL version of the game, he is not going to crush content. Like for example, when we first had Aranya in the game, and for a good 6 months, Aranya plus a friend Aranya could really just melt every single stage in the game. It's not going to be at that level, but currently in the current meta anyway, most stages are simple enough, so I don't think that really matters that much. But I guess the short of it is, do manage your expectations here. Anyway, going to the pros and cons. So firstly, the pros, as I mentioned, his PT has really very stacked utility. The 6 turns gold frame debuff means that it is very safe overall, and while it is comparatively shorter in duration compared to Celsius, I don't think that's a very fair comparison to make, because don't forget that Papalymo is also a turn hogger, and by the time the enemy takes 6 turns in a row to wear off the debuff, Papalymo would have gotten in many more actions than Celsius can anyway. Beyond that, the special effects from the BT based on his fire or ice stance is really pretty powerful. In essence, it's sort of like a combination of a few different characters in one, which also means that if you are fairly new to the game and you haven't really built your roster yet, then Papalymo is actually a very good pickup in that scenario, because of the fact that you can sort of pick and choose which kind of utility you want him to bring to the fight, which means then that he can cover a wider variety of fights than a standard character can. Like I said, he can also go either single target or AoE, so if you haven't really built your roster yet in the DPS department especially, then you can just go for Papalymo and then just go into ice stance in single target fight and then go into fire stance in multi-target fights. I actually do like that he has many instant and free turns throughout his kit, so he can really go insane into how many turns he can chain potentially. You can also maybe combine this with, say for example, a character like Pain, where she can grant Papalymo the Pumi stacks, and that way Papalymo can really go for days. That actually brings me to the cons. The fact that Papalymo really relies on overall total damage done, which is the damage per action that Papalymo does isn't actually as high as some other characters, because for example his AoE attacks are roughly around 6 HP dumps and his single target attack is around 12 without splash. Now if you compare these to other characters, that may seem low, but on the fact that a lot of Papalymo's abilities and skills are instant and free turns anyway, you can take many actions, the turn count will remain the same, and the total damage at the end of it all will likely surpass the total damage that someone else can do. However, this does require that Papalymo take many actions in a row to out damage other characters, and this means that Papalymo will quickly chew through your force time. That isn't necessarily the end of the world though, because we are in the force retain era. So even after the end of force time, you still likely have 300% plus force gauge bonus anyway, and then you can still then continue on chaining turns with Papalymo and dealing some very decent damage at the cost of just 1 turn, or I should say 1 turn count. So if usually in many of your runs you exceed the 1 force time and you go into the force retain portion of the fight anyway, then I think Papalymo really fits that sort of playstyle. You really need to have the mindset of not just looking at the numbers flashing on the screen, because it's not a fair comparison, but really understanding that Papalymo does his total damage across the course of several instant and free turns instead. As for me, I actually probably will skip Papalymo. This is really a matter of my playstyle, and firstly, one of the main considerations is that I am very low on BT ingots. I only have enough BT ingots to green one more BT, and like I said earlier in this video, Papalymo without BT isn't worth using at all. I'm sure there will be some people who will disagree on that, but really, and I guess this is my opinion, but I don't see the value of bringing in Papalymo without BT. In that case, in many fights, I would rather bring someone else instead. Second reason, and this also pertains to how I generally like to approach stages, I don't really like to rely on turn disables because generally speaking, I like to do low turn runs, and in majority of my runs, I tend to just try to finish the fight before the boss can get any turn. So if you think about it, if the enemies aren't getting turns, then why do you need a turn disable? Landing this sort of debuff when enemies aren't getting turns essentially means that you are wasting a debuff. But again, that's just how I like to approach the game. Finally, I think, although Papalymo can actually cover pretty decently across either AoE or single target attacks, this is actually both a good and a bad thing. So say for example, if you're in a single target fight, it feels very nice using his ice attacks, but if you're using his astral fire for example in a single target fight, you're only doing an action that has 6 HP dumps on one enemy essentially. Likewise, if for example you are in a 3 target fight, using his Umbra Ice attack or his Xenoglossy attack will feel pretty bad because they don't have splash. And while you can of course try to focus more on one type of attack during the fight, if for example you want to enter into BT mode, or for example you want the specific effects of either his fire or ice stance from his BT aura, then you would have to try to weigh whether is it worth entering say fire stance for example and use an AoE attack on a single target, or enter into ice stance, which requires you to use ice attacks, but what if the fight is multi-target? So there are some of these considerations as well to think about, and for me, rather than going through all this, I would rather just look at the fight, see whether it's single target or multi-target, and just choose a character that specializes in one. You don't need a character who can do both unless you don't have a lot of depth in your roster. That is a different scenario altogether, but for that reason, for myself, since I am quite comfortable with the roster that I've built up, I don't think I need that versatility. That doesn't necessarily mean that it doesn't hold value for the next person, and that is the exact reason why I don't generally try to make recommendations whether to pull or skip Papalymo. I hope though that at least this video has given you a little bit of more context into what Papalymo can do. And like I said earlier in the video as well, this doesn't cover in very great detail. I do highly recommend going through the infographic that the Tonberry Troupe has done. That's it for this update video. As always, I hope the videos were helpful, and if you enjoyed the content, do leave a like, comment and subscribe. Till then, I'll catch you guys in the next one. Bye!